Chapter 10 feels different from the earlier chapters. Until now, the story mostly focused on building the mystery around the main character and showing how abnormal he is psychologically. But in this chapter, we finally begin seeing how those terrifying abilities start affecting the people around him. The chapter opens with the main character remaining unbelievably calm while everyone else behaves emotionally around him. That's something the story keeps emphasizing repeatedly. He never reacts like a normal person. Instead of expressing emotions naturally, he studies situations first, analyzes them, calculates them. Even simple conversations feel strategic when he's involved. And honestly, that's what makes him so unsettling. The main character understands something most people never realize. Human beings only see the version of you that you choose to show them. And because he spent his past life surviving as a scammer and manipulator, he mastered that skill long ago. Throughout Chapter 10, we see him continuing to move deeper into the acting world. But unlike ordinary actors who approach acting emotionally, he approaches it scientifically, almost psychologically. When he watches people, he doesn't just observe their expressions, he studies timing, breathing, tone, tiny emotional reactions. It feels less like acting practice and more like someone dissecting human behavior. One of the most important things in this chapter is how naturally he changes depending on the person in front of him. If someone expects confidence, he becomes confident. If someone wants kindness, he instantly becomes warm and approachable. And the creepy part is how effortless it looks. Not forced, not practiced, instinctive. Like changing personalities became part of his survival system years ago. The chapter also starts showing how people around him slowly become affected by his presence. Even when he says something simple, people react differently to him compared to others, because there's something terrifyingly realistic about the way he expresses emotions. Most actors imitate feelings, but the main character? He fully reconstructs personalities. That's why his behavior doesn't feel like performance. It feels real, too real. And honestly, that's what scares people without them understanding why. One of the best psychological details in Chapter 10 is how disconnected the main character feels from his own emotions. He understands emotions perfectly, but it almost feels like he experiences them from the outside instead of naturally feeling them himself. Like a man who studied humanity so long that he stopped feeling human. That creates this constant, uncomfortable tension throughout the chapter. Because every scene raises the same question. Who is the real him? Is there even a real personality underneath all those masks anymore? Or did he completely lose himself after spending years pretending to be other people? The chapter also continues building the idea that acting is the perfect environment for someone like him. Think about it. In normal society, deception destroys trust. But in acting, deception becomes talent. Wearing masks becomes art. Pretending becomes success. And honestly, nobody fits that world better than the main character. Because unlike normal actors who train to understand emotions, he survived by weaponizing emotions against people for years. That's why every chapter makes him feel less like a normal genius and more like a transcendent being specifically created for acting. Chapter 10 basically confirms one terrifying truth. The main character may become the greatest actor alive, not because he learned acting better than others, but because he already mastered the hardest part long before entering the industry, becoming someone else completely. But the truly terrifying part hasn't happened yet, because soon, the world will finally witness what happens when a man with no true identity steps fully into the spotlight. And once that happens, nobody will be able to look away. Chapter 11 feels like a turning point for the psychological atmosphere of the story. Until now, the manhwa kept hinting that the main character was abnormal. But in this chapter, the story starts making it obvious. The chapter opens with the main character continuing to observe everything around him with that same cold calmness we've seen since the beginning. But this time, the difference is more noticeable. Everyone around him behaves emotionally, normally, naturally. Meanwhile, the main character acts like someone calculating every movement before making it. Even when he speaks, it feels controlled, measured, like he's carefully choosing the exact version of himself he wants others to see. And honestly, that's terrifying once you realize what he's doing. The chapter keeps emphasizing one important thing. The main character understands people better than normal humans do. Not because he's emotionally warm or empathetic, but because he spent years surviving through manipulation and deception. That's why every interaction in this chapter feels intense. Whenever someone talks to him, he instantly reads their emotions, their expectations, their insecurities, and then he changes himself to match them perfectly. The scary part is how automatic it looks. There's no hesitation, no awkwardness. It's like his personality has become fluid, able to transform instantly depending on the situation. And Chapter 11 really starts exploring the psychological consequences of that ability, because readers begin asking themselves something disturbing. If someone changes personalities constantly for survival, do they eventually lose their original self completely? That question becomes the emotional core of this chapter. The main character continues moving toward the acting industry, but unlike normal actors who dream about fame or passion, he approaches acting almost like fate, like he finally found the one world where his unnatural abilities make sense. Think about it. In normal society, lying destroys trust. Manipulation ruins lives. Fake identities are dangerous. But in acting, those exact same skills are rewarded. People praise you for becoming someone else. And honestly, nobody fits that world more perfectly than him. One of the strongest moments in Chapter 11 is how realistic his emotional control feels. When normal actors perform emotions, there's usually still a visible separation between the actor and the role. But the main character, there's no separation at all. When he changes expressions or shifts personalities, it feels complete, like the original person disappears. That's why the people around him slowly begin reacting differently to him. Some become fascinated, some feel nervous. Others simply can't understand why his presence feels so overwhelming, because subconsciously, they can sense that his acting feels too real. And honestly, that's because it isn't normal acting. The chapter heavily implies that the main character has spent so much of his life pretending to be other people that transformation itself became his true identity. That's why his performances feel terrifyingly natural. Not practiced, not learned, instinctive. The chapter also keeps showing how emotionally detached he feels internally. He understands emotions perfectly, but at the same time, it almost feels like he studies them from the outside instead of experiencing them naturally himself. Like a man who spent so long copying human behavior that he forgot how to genuinely live as himself. And honestly, that psychological tension is what makes this story addictive, because every chapter makes the main character feel both impressive and frightening at the same time. You want to admire his intelligence, but you also feel uncomfortable watching him, because the story constantly reminds us that this man became extraordinary through deception long before becoming an actor. And Chapter 11 basically confirms one terrifying truth. The entertainment industry may have just discovered the perfect actor, because the main character already mastered the art of becoming someone else long before stepping onto a stage. But the truly terrifying part hasn't happened yet, because soon, the world will finally witness what happens when a man with endless fake faces begins standing under the spotlight. And once that happens, nobody will know where the acting ends, and the real monster begins. Chapter 12 feels much darker psychologically compared to the earlier chapters. At this point, the story is no longer asking whether the main character is talented. That answer is already obvious. Now the real question becomes, how far can someone go after losing their original identity? And honestly, this chapter makes that question feel genuinely disturbing. The chapter begins with the main character continuing to move carefully through the acting world while maintaining that same cold, calculated personality we've seen since the start. But this time, the story places even more focus on how he interacts with other people. Whenever someone speaks to him, he instantly analyzes them, not emotionally, strategically. He studies their reactions, their expectations, the way they respond to confidence, kindness, fear, or pressure, and then he changes himself accordingly. That's what makes every conversation involving him feel strange, because it never feels spontaneous. It feels controlled, like the main character is constantly selecting which version of himself he wants others to see. And honestly, that's terrifying once you realize how natural it has become for him. The chapter strongly emphasizes that this ability didn't come from acting practice. It came from survival. Before regression, the main character survived by manipulating people, creating fake identities, and becoming whoever others trusted most. Now, inside the entertainment industry, those exact same skills are turning him into something abnormal. One of the most important moments in Chapter 12 is how people around him slowly start reacting differently to his presence. Even when he says simple things, people pay attention because there's something unbelievably convincing about him. The story keeps hinting that his performances don't feel like normal acting. They feel real, too real, like he completely abandons his own personality and temporarily becomes another human being entirely. And honestly, that psychological detail is what makes this series different from normal acting manhwa. Most acting stories focus on hard work and emotional growth, but this story focuses on identity, on transformation, on a man who spent so long pretending to be other people that he may no longer know who he truly is himself. The chapter also keeps showing how emotionally detached the main character feels internally. He understands emotions perfectly, probably better than almost anyone else, but at the same time, it feels like he observes emotions from the outside instead of naturally experiencing them himself. Like someone studying humans instead of living as one. That creates this constant, uncomfortable atmosphere throughout the chapter, because readers start noticing something frightening. The main character never fully relaxes, never fully drops his mask. Even in ordinary situations, it feels like he's still performing, still calculating, still adapting himself depending on what others expect from him. And honestly, that makes him feel less like a normal protagonist and more like a psychological predator hiding inside the acting industry. The chapter also continues building the idea that acting is the perfect environment for someone like him. Think about it. In normal society, fake personalities are dangerous. Manipulation destroys trust. But in acting, those same abilities become talent. People praise you for transformation, for becoming someone else completely. And nobody fits that world more perfectly than the main character. Because unlike ordinary actors who learned acting through training, he mastered the art of deception long before stepping onto a stage. One of the creepiest parts of Chapter 12 is how smoothly he changes expressions and emotions. There's no hesitation, no visible effort, just instant transformation. Like his face itself has become a weapon. And honestly, that's why the title, The Thousand-Faced Actor, feels so important. Not because he plays many roles in movies, but because he already spent his entire life becoming countless different people just to survive. The chapter basically confirms one terrifying truth. The entertainment industry may have discovered a genius, but what they're actually witnessing might be something much darker than talent. A man who no longer has a fixed identity at all. But things are about to become even more disturbing, because soon, the line between acting and reality will completely disappear for him. And once that happens, nobody around him will know whether they're talking to the real person or just another perfectly crafted face.